Hello and welcome to Model Railroading for Dummies, the how-to show for model railroading dummies just like me. Now, our next major project is going to be a fairly major project. It's going to be another kit bashing thing. Only this time it's not going to be with Model Railroader, the same thing as with the State Line Kit Bash Challenge that Model Railroader Video Plus did. This time, what we're going to do is I'm going to make a elevator slash feed mill, which is going to be one of my major customers on my layout, which is going to be right back in here. So, there's going to be a couple kits I'm going to be using. Main kit is this one, Valley Growers Elevator. This is a very nice kit. Walthers has 4 different types of elevators. The first one is your classic wood elevator, which is basically the exact same shape as this, only this is steel and that one's wood. Usually with the way we're up until World War I-ish, they just built elevators entirely out of wood, with a few exceptions here and there. Because they were fairly easy to put up to store grain. And so if you're modeling the Midwest, elevators is the thing to go for to get that Midwestern look. But starting in World War I, wood became a little bit more scarce slash expensive. So, and one of the major problems with wood elevators is, number one, they caught fire because wood burns. And steam engines throw cinders and stuff. And grain dust is not good, does not go well with sparks from engine smokestacks. So, that was problem number 1 with wood elevators. Problem number 2 is that they quite often had to be re-sided on a fairly regular basis because wood rots in weather. So, what they ended up doing is, during World War I, thanks to the steel production from World War I, steel became a lot more cheaper for your average run-of-the-mill business. So, then they started covering their wood elevators with steel sheeting, and it worked very well. Which is why a lot of these steel elevators have the same shape as your wood ones, which is reflected here. Now, quite often with elevators, they would add on to their elevators as they needed. They quite often looks like they have another elevator attached onto the side, and it's just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, whichever they needed. Then eventually they started going to concrete silos. Now, Walthers has 2 different versions of this. It has a smaller version and a much larger version, which is more your modern type elevator today. Most, particularly on your Class 1 railroads, the only type of elevators that are usually served tend to be more concrete. But your short lines are more likely to have your steel type elevators. Also, another form of elevators is simply a grain bin. Like here in South Dakota, Elkton, South Dakota, that's all they have, just grain bins. And also in Lake Preston, that's all they have anymore. The original elevators are long gone, but they still have these. And these were one thing, these grain silo thingies, these were used a lot to add on to the grain capacity for the elevators. So this is another thing. So I'm also going to be using this. This is also Walthers, a very nice kit. So, and another kit I'm going to be using is this brickwork storage building, which also has steel siding. Now, I'm going to use this sort of as a storage shed for your feeds, your bagged feeds. Because quite often, elevators were also feed mills. So they mix up feed for the surrounding area and deliver it to local farmers. So, and quite often they bag their own feed. So, or they would also ship it in. But the basic form of this building I think will work very well in this Midwestern setting. Also, Another kit, once again from Walthers, is a grain dryer kit. Now this is the smaller version, and you'll find these a lot of smaller. You'll still find these on elevators today, but for the most part in your bigger elevators, they use a different type of grain dryer, which Walthers has not come up with a kit yet for that, unfortunately. Now, also, if you get two of these, you can stack them on top of each other. I have seen that, where you have a couple of these grain dryers stacked together. Now, what this grain dryer is for is, sometimes grain is brought in wet, or too wet to store, because if you store the grain that's been shelled, it'll start to mold and stuff and become worthless. So then they'd have to bring the grain to this dryer and dry it enough so that it can store. So that's what the grain dryers are for. And last but not least, I'll be using Rick's elevator kit, although I've already built it, so if you want to see me building one of these things, you're going to have to go to the State Line Kitbash Challenge. So, first thing I think we're going to do is, I'm going to show you some pictures that I've taken, mainly from inside the car, so the picture quality is not going to be all that great. Showing you the different varieties in elevators, and show that there's a lot of modeling potential in elevators. So without further ado, I'll quick show you some of the pictures, and then we'll go to the layout and show you, and then we'll plot the location for our elevator. Okay, here's our first picture here of an elevator in Nebraska, I believe along the Nebraska Central Railroad. Now this is an example of a modern built one. Now elevators built today, they will more than likely have a circular track around them so that they can load a unit train of grain, because that's what the big railroads want. So this is an example of a modern concrete elevator. Now this second picture here is a little bit closer, and it shows that it has the steel bins as well as the concrete bins. And you notice the circular structure up front? That is actually a modern grain dryer. And I wish Walthers would come up with a kit for that, because if they did, I'd be using that kit versus the other one. Now you notice that the yellow railing type thing, that is for protection for the workers who load the cars. Because what they do is they connect themselves up to that, so if they happen to slip on top of the cars, they're not going to fall anywhere, or not likely to get very hurt. Now this picture here is an example of a small town concrete elevator. Now you have the main elevator complex with, I believe it's six round silos or bins or whatever, with a covered elevator complex on top. Now if you notice to the left of the complex, you have a separate, bigger or concrete storage bin. And that's sometimes what they do. One of the things that they do to add more storage, add a concrete storage bin versus a steel. And I'm going to be adding a couple that I'm going to scratch build for my complex too. Now if you look at the thing to the right, the elevator complex sort of going off to the right, that is actually something for storing a pile of grain. Because quite often around harvest time, they bring in so much grain they don't have enough room to store all this stuff. So they have to pile it up outside. But when it's outside, then it's exposed to the elements of the rain and snow. So one of the solutions to this, they basically make a permanent grain pile system. Now if you look towards the bottom of it, that's the sort of steel wall there. That's actually a gigantic circle, and they'll fill that all up so it's a gigantic cone, and then when that's full, they'll actually put some plastic over it so it looks like a gigantic white cone, and that helps preserve it. Now this is an example of elevator complex that only has steel bins, and this looks like a fairly smaller location, but still, that's one thing that they'll use, just use steel bins.
Now this is an elevator over in Nebraska, and it's a very tall one, taller than most of them are. Now if you want to have a very tall structure, what you'd want to do is increase the size of the Walther's kit so that it's much taller. And this is the yard here that elevator is located in on the Burlington Northern Santa Fe line. And in fact, this line here is where the California Zephyr goes through at night. Now this elevator here, it's once again a smallish elevator. It's concrete. But you notice all around it, there's a lot of steel bins here for storage. Now if you look at this picture here, you notice that there's actually a second elevator in town that's very similar. Once again, it's concrete, but yet it's different. And they're both of them are very distinct. It's not uncommon for towns to have more than one elevator. So that's something to consider. Okay, here we are back to that original elevator complex. And it also has a place where the trucks can go underneath the tracks. Okay, here's another view of that elevator here. Okay, here is an example of a small town elevator. No longer rail served because I don't even think there's rails here. Now you notice to the right, somewhat kind of hidden, is the main elevator, the original elevator. And in front of that, you notice the grain dryer thing, the one that Walther's has. And to the left of that, you have a real big, grain bin. And to the left of that, you have some real smaller ones. Now, there are two different companies that has this style of grain bin, Rick's and Walther's. Rick's has a smaller version, whereas Walther's has the larger version. So, if you wanted to, you can use a combination of the two to show different size ones. The smaller ones would definitely be older versus the bigger ones. Now, this is in Volga here. Volga has two small elevators, no longer rail served. And you notice the one on the right, it's a taller one and it's got basically a flat roof, but although it's slightly slanted. Whereas the one on the left is more traditional style, but even so, it's got a flat portion. So I mean, even there, it's a little bit different. And this is a elevator in Ruthven, Minnesota. Once again, concrete, and up front is the grain dryer thing. This is over in Arlington, South Dakota, where you have the main concrete elevator section, plus the steel bins. This is over at Lake Preston, South Dakota, where they've scrapped basically the original elevators and just put up gigantic grain bins. They ship a lot of grain here, if I'm not mistaken. And this is another picture of the Arlington one from slightly further away, so you get a little bit better angle, a different angle at it. Now this picture here is over at Hetland, South Dakota, real tiny town. Now the building to the right, I don't think it's an elevator, but I think it's probably either just a feed mill, or more probably it could be an old flour mill. But obviously it's no longer used. But the main elevator here is still used, although it's no longer rail served. They don't even have a rail siding anymore for rail car storage. But this is a totally different shape. And something that, I mean, these do come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And this is over here in Aurora. You notice to the left you have the original elevator there. And although they do not load up the grain from the original elevator, they do that only from the grain bins that they have there. And there's also a couple more behind where the cameraman, is located. And the final picture here is over in Elkton, South Dakota, where they used to have an elevator and a whole bunch of smaller bins, but they leveled all that down and made two really big ones. So these are some examples of elevators. And just a little bit of the wide variety that you can have with elevators.
Okay, here we are at the layout. Now, this is the location here where we're going to be building the elevator complex. Now, I think on this end here, we're going to have the, way down this end is going to be the storage shed for the feed, where the bag feed is in. And I'm going to have the occasional box car maybe shipping in some bag feed, shipping out some bag feed. So you can have an extra spot there for occasional activity. But one thing I think I'm going to do is extend this siding a little bit, add on an extra 6 inches or something, just so I can make sure I can have the maximum amount of grain hopper cars possible to make it look a little bit more imposing and stuff. So there's 2 different wall pieces here with different door placements. The only difference is the one side has a sort of wood thing under the door, which is probably the truck side if I'm not mistaken, and this side would be the rail side. I'm just going to have to decide which side I like the best. Then over in here, I'll better put this here, in between the main elevator and this building, I think will be the... No, on second thought, I think I want to have the elevator next, the main elevator. Or with the grain dryer here, in between this elevator and the grain silos, or whatever. So that's my thinking there. So, and as this is a fairly narrow bit here, one kit actually is going to be the same as 2, more or less. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it look like they've added on. So essentially what I'm going to be doing here is I'll have one of these sections facing the track here, say the original elevator, and then another section like so, only have to be cutting off like this section here, will be like this, with one of these wall sections right in here. So that, I think that will look very, very cool. And it will definitely give that Midwestern elevator look, but yet looks it will look very distinct from the original Walther's kit, so that it looks like a very distinct kit, and it won't be near as recognizable, which is the best thing about the kit bashing. So the main thing here is make sure I figure out the exact distance between the track and the walls that I need for the amount of depth. Because the last thing you want to do is build the whole thing, put it in place, and suddenly you're about a quarter of an inch too close to the track. Or vice versa, but mainly too close to the track. Now, to the edge of the ballast is about 2 inches, according to this ruler. So, I think what we're basically going to want to do is, I got a cut of cards here. Place the elevator approximately where you think it'll look good. Make sure that everything's going to run smoothly. And also, as advice for other buildings, if they happen to have like an awning or something sticking out this side, make sure you put that into consideration when you're deciding this. Because I did a mistake there when doing the cold storage building they did a little while ago. I didn't put the awning figures into calculations, so fortunately I was able to scooch the track over just enough to make it fit, barely. But you don't want to try and do that. That's the last thing you want to do. But I think we are pretty good here. So what we're going to want to do is just find the exact depth. And we are looking at 1.5 inches. So I think that's what we're going to do. Now it comes with a nice base here. So what we'll probably just do is cut 1.5 inches here. So that way I can be sure when I'm cutting all these other pieces that things are going to fit right. That's the last thing you want to do for things not to fit right. Then over here, what I'm going to do is, let's see, need to find, so yeah, I think I may go with a full length or partial length building, like so. Just kind of set things up the way you think it should fit. Okay, put that there. Here's the main elevator thing, which will be placed more or less about the same spot as the grain dryer. Then what we'll do is add the... Now, I already got this one made up from once before, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to split it in half so I can get 2 here. And let's see. It's going to be about 2¼ inches deep, which is just about perfect. So I'm going to fit 1, if not 2 half pieces here, and potentially another one, because I do have another kit here, and make it about this partial. So I'll have 2 or 3 grain bins right here. And I think when this is all put together, it is going to look so awesome. Of course, me, I love the looks of grain elevators. I've grown to absolutely love their uniqueness and modeling potential. This is definitely an industry where if you want to make something unique, different from everyone else, just Kitbash an elevator. And you don't even have to drive to the Midwest if you're not around here. Just look online for elevator pictures. I'm sure you can find dozens, if not probably hundreds or thousands. And just look for features that you like, you think that you can model. I mean, this has got a lot of potential here. And the thing I like about elevators is you got a town of 150, population 150, and they have a major industry here that ships how many carloads a year? And it just dwarfs, it can dwarf the trains. And it just looks so awesome. So that's my plans for this elevator project. Okay, that's going to have to be it for today. Not so much... This episode doesn't have a whole lot of actual modeling, but a lot of modeling tips and ideas and the planning for my latest, biggest project. And this is going to be a big one, I think. I mean, it's going to be the biggest industry in my layout. And so, I'm really excited to work on this. So, I mean, I've now got the planning done as to where everything's going to be located and stuff. Now, well, starting next week, we're going to be working on the model and cutting things up, cutting all the pieces apart, and then starting to put them back together. So, if you like this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. And if you do subscribe, make sure to hit the little bell icon so you can receive notifications when I release new content. So until next time, keep working on your model railroads, keep having fun, and until next time, keep your trains on the tracks.